I'm Greg Skalka, president of the Under the Computer Hood user group in San Diego, California. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the installation, care, and feeding of a mesh router. Something that I have had personal experience with in installing a mesh router about 1.5 to 2 years ago. And I found it to be a very useful thing, solved a lot of my problems with Wi-Fi, and made my wife a lot happier. But as all stories go, you have to start in the beginning. In the beginning, computers were personal. They were a one-person, one-machine situation. The old IBM PCXTs didn't have any networking, no connections. Maybe you hooked a printer up to it, but you didn't have to worry about any connections to anything until finally there were some things that you could go access, bulletin boards, and you could communicate. Computers went from being a device that was just a computing device to something you could also communicate with. It's kind of a misnomer to really call like our smartphones, anywhere like a computer. They're really communicators, kind of more like Captain Kirk communicating than doing any kind of useful work on them. But the evolution of things from computers to phones had to go through these different steps. We had, as I said, bulletin boards in the initial networking for computers, and the World Wide Web was invented, and we had email. So now a lot of the use of your PC or your laptop was in communicating with other people. But we did it through a dial-up connection, through a phone line. A lot of people, young people today don't understand that. They might go see the movie, You've Got Mail, and then, oh, what does that mean? And all those tones that you used to have when your modem was connecting, that's all gone now. But what your main concern was in those days in having networking was, where can I find a phone jack, and where am I going to connect in to that? There weren't opportunities to go on the internet at Starbucks because they didn't have a bunch of phone lines laying around. You did this from home. Eventually, Ethernet came along, a better way and a faster way to connect your computers and laptops to each other and to the internet. They brought faster internal connections in your home. You could have home networks. You had all the devices needed to have that, routers and switches and cable modems and all that kind of thing, and better internal connections. It really allowed the interconnection of things in the world, all the data centers and that, to be able to be possible. But it was a wired connection. You could have nice, fast connections in your home and to the internet, but you were still limited by where you could find a connection. I initially had just wired connections in a few rooms. We had a water leak in our house, and I took that opportunity when they had holes in the walls to pull Ethernet cable and phone and coax into all the bedrooms so that I could have a better home network. And that proved to be very useful. Wired Ethernet was pretty fast. It was secure. You weren't likely to be able to have people from the outside get to your network because it's all inside your house. There couldn't be someone parked in front of your house getting your data because they couldn't access it. But it wasn't very convenient because you couldn't go to the Starbucks still and do anything. So because we had laptops, we wanted to be mobile, and so then wireless capability came about, and you had cellular capability in phones, but you wanted to have data on your phone. So they had to come up with data networking capability in those cellular signals. Now we've got all these, went from 1, 2, 3, G as in generation. Now we're going to have 5G capability. It's kind of an odd way to, unit of measure is the G, or generation, but that's what they use. More and more bandwidth for non-phone devices, although you could have a cellular modem capability. Wi-Fi was developed, and that allowed your laptop or other devices to connect to Wi-Fi networks. There's also Bluetooth wireless capability, but it's a much lower bandwidth, so it's only good for low-rate things like wireless keyboard or mouse or something like that. You really wouldn't be able to surf the web through Bluetooth. You need something with a higher bandwidth like Wi-Fi. There's also a Bluetooth LE or Bluetooth Low Energy, which allows battery-powered devices to be connected to the internet through some type of a hub, because the Bluetooth Low Energy signal only comes about certain periods of time when it needs to send signals rather than transmitting all the time using less power. And Zigbee is a similar situation. So what is Wi-Fi? Because that's what we're going to be talking about with mesh routers. They are for Wi-Fi mobile communications. And it's wireless network connection through RF signals. All radio frequency signals that we use for different things are RF frequencies that are modulated. And the ones used for Wi-Fi are typically 2.4, 5 gigahertz, and now they're adding 60 gigahertz. Now, why do we use those frequencies as opposed to something else? Well, there are countrywide organizations that allocate the RF spectrum, and each country does this separately, although they try and coordinate it because you obviously want to have the ability to communicate throughout the world. But there are variances in how they do things in different countries. But most countries have allocated certain frequencies, in this case, the 2.45 and 60, as an ISM, Industrial, Scientific, and Medical Radio Band. It's not like the licensed band, dedicated frequencies that companies would use for between cell towers and things like that, where they get to buy the spectrum and use it and no one else can. These are frequencies that don't have to have a license for, so companies can produce all sorts of different kinds of products for them and innovate more easily. So for most cases, they're all the same. A few international differences. For instance, on the 2.4 gig, I think Japan has a few more channels than we do. So there's slight differences in things, but pretty much they want to have a standardization for the whole world. But because all these different companies can make all sorts of different things, in this ISM band, you can't expect that you get exclusive use to that frequency, because there'll be companies that'll make different products like cordless phones, and Bluetooth is actually, all the Bluetooth products are actually in that same band. Microwave ovens emit RF energy in that band. Garage door opener controllers, baby monitors, all these different products that we have now that we like are in this ISM band, because companies can use that and do quick innovation and be able to offer these products without having to go through big licensing problems. But then you have some interference. There's also other things that these RF frequencies have problems with, and that's other material. If you're furnishings or you're building, those will all attenuate RF frequencies depending on the frequency to different degrees. Even elements in our air, the 60 gigahertz frequency has been a frequency range that hasn't been used very much, because that happens to be at the oxygen absorption frequency. If you transmit between 2 points in our atmosphere and sweep it, you'll find that there's a big null, a lot of attenuation around 60 gigahertz. And that inhibits its use for long-range communications in an oxygen atmosphere like we have on Earth. It would probably work fine on some other planet that didn't have that problem. But it's not been used for a lot of things. But it has some great advantages in that it does attenuate, so that you could have a localized transmitter that has a small cell footprint, and it's not going to bleed over into the next apartment as much and things like that. So it has some big advantages. Higher frequencies are attenuated more, and different, like I said, like with 60 gigahertz, there's a specific notch due to the oxygen in our atmosphere. But for normal Wi-Fi, you can typically get 300 feet in open air, 30 to 100 feet in buildings as a rule of thumb, but it's going to be, you know, very dependent on what you're transmitting through. Now, to make all this possible in the freewheeling ISM band, there have to be standards. You really wouldn't want to have, oh, well, D-Link decided they're going to come out with these products. And this is really kind of the way it started out. Companies come out with products, and they're specific to their company. So you wouldn't want to say, well, I can't go to Starbucks. I have to go to Dunkin' Donuts because Dunkin' Donuts uses D-Link Wi-Fi stuff, and Starbucks uses, you know, Cisco stuff, and I only have one kind in my laptop. So there have to be standards, and there are international standards bodies that do this. IEEE is one that deals with this, and they've created the IEEE 802.11 standards with all these different alphabet soup things at the end to allow them to improve it over time. As with the cell phone stuff, they also kind of talk about it in generations. There's a Wi-Fi 4, Wi-Fi 5, Wi-Fi 6, but you don't hear a lot about that. All it really means is as time goes on, they keep increasing the bandwidth. What really is part of the standards is these letters. The 802.11b was the first widely used Wi-Fi standard. It used 2.4 gigahertz. And then G was a popular one, and now we have AC and AX are becoming much more popular. The B, G, and N used the 2.4 gigahertz frequency, which in the US was divided into 11 channels, 5 megahertz each, but these channels unfortunately overlap. So to avoid overlap of the channels and interference, so to speak, with other channels, you only get really 3 good channels in that frequency band, typically like 1, 6, and 11. The 802.11 AH, J, et cetera, added in 5 gigahertz capability. And that added another 23 non-overlapping 20 megahertz channels, a lot more bandwidth, a lot more data capability. The 60 gigahertz is going to add more, but it will be more localized because of that attenuation issue. Now with Wi-Fi, you've got to have some standards, some rules to be able to allow people to operate. One feature is the SSID, or Service Set Identifier, which is a network name. So how do you know that you're going to, connect to the Starbucks network rather than something else? They'll post, this is our SSID, and then you know what it is. You set your own for your own home, and then you know you're connected to yours, and you're not connected to your neighbors. You also, because your neighbors have probably got Wi-Fi too, how do you keep your data safe? You have to have encryption. First encryption was not so great, but it's evolved over time from the WEP, or wired equivalent privacy, all the way up to new standards, WPA3. You want to be running the best encryption you can, if possible. VPN is another way of securing your data. So I won't really go into it all, but there's lots to be said for that. When you're using it in a non-encrypted situation, like at Starbucks, where they may not have any encryption, it's just an open network, you can use that to keep your data safe. But security is a big factor to consider in wireless, because you don't have that protection. Anyone could theoretically pick up your signal who's within range. There are different ways of having Wi-Fi networks in the standards. And I'll just touch on this briefly. Citywide Wi-Fi, the city of Santa Clara up in the Bay Area of California near San Francisco has a citywide Wi-Fi. They were putting in wireless utility meter reading capability throughout the city. Found they could piggyback on that to have municipal Wi-Fi. And so they have Wi-Fi throughout Santa Clara, which is kind of cool. You can have campus-wide Wi-Fi at a college or something like that, or a business. There's a Wi-Fi called Wi-Fi Ad Hoc, Wi-Fi Direct, Tunnel Direct Link setup. But the one we're going to talk about is mesh here, at least after a bit. But that's another type of networking setup. There are a number of Wi-Fi hosts that you can have that provide networks. Wi-Fi routers. Typically, if you've got a Wi-Fi system, you probably bought a router that is just like any regular wired router, but it has a wireless access point built into it, a radio transmitter and receiver. And if that's enabled, then the home network side, the network access translation side, the side that's got a different IP address, that's your protected side of your home network, has this transmitter receiver on it, and you can have Wi-Fi. You could also, if you didn't have a router like that, you could buy a wireless access point, plug it into your home network with a wire, and it will broadcast and receive and allow you to do that. You can use that in conjunction with a Wi-Fi router, but each is going to have its own network, wireless channels, its own SSID. So it's effectively two different networks that you're dealing with. And that presents problems if you're doing it in your house, moving from one spot to another. There are other devices, wireless bridges, range extenders, repeaters can be used to extend your present Wi-Fi setup, but once again, it's doing it with separate separate RF networks and SSIDs, or repeaters that will pick up a Wi-Fi signal and then resend it as a different channel with a different SSID. Those are ways you can expand what you can get with your current router or other Wi-Fi devices, but there are some issues with that. For Wi-Fi user devices, the first was, laptops, and that's what drove me to first look at using Wi-Fi devices. It's either laptops or my wife's iPhone, and her wanting to be on our Wi-Fi network rather than using the cellular system. Eventually, desktops became connected onto your network with Wi-Fi rather than cables. Tablets came out. You didn't want to have a cable hanging off of tablets. Those, by definition, were typically Wi-Fi. Smartphones are obviously, when they found that they couldn't get enough data or they didn't want to have to pay for data, you could hook it up to your network through Wi-Fi. Even printers now are Wi-Fi printers. You can set them up so that they will connect to your Wi-Fi network, and you can print to them through any of your other devices on the network, whether they're Wi-Fi or not. But it will, use your access point to transmit the printed data to the printer, and you don't have to worry about, oh, I want to put my printer in that closet over there, so it's not noisy, but I don't have a jack in there. I don't want to run a cable, so it can be wireless. And then there's all these smart home devices. That's really what's been driving more network capability in Wi-Fi, is all these smart home devices. The Alexa, Echoes, Google smart home devices, these smart speakers, wireless cameras that you put in your house and want to monitor what's going on, wireless baby monitors. You can monitor, see your baby through a phone app, thermostats that are controlled and run through your phone, that are controlled through apps on your Wi-Fi network. Other appliances like your refrigerator that will tell you you're running out of milk. All these IoT, or Internet of Things devices, little things that do all these kinds of things, have to be connected to the internet. Fitness trackers, all sorts of things like that are now going on the internet and have to be connected, and they're doing it a lot through Wi-Fi. So this was my first Wi-Fi setup. As through the beginning story, like I told at first, I had a good wired connection in my home, but in the early days, Wi-Fi was kind of a suspicious thing to me. It allowed people to potentially tap into my network, and I didn't like that. So my first Wi-Fi network was a wireless access point, because my wife wanted to go on the Wi-Fi network with their phone, or it may have been because we bought an Amazon, or no, it wasn't. We were just trying to hook laptops up at that point. I plugged a wireless access point that I bought into a switched power strip so that when she was done doing things on Wi-Fi with her phone, I could switch off the power strip, and overnight there wasn't the opportunity for someone, my neighbor or someone outside, to try and connect to my Wi-Fi signal and hack me or something, get my data. But as she used it more and more, I think finally, it probably was when we bought a Amazon Echo device that was going to be on all the time. I finally decided, well, I have to have this thing on all the time. But where I put it was not really good. As you can see, it's attached to her computer desk, kind of low, and these RF devices transfer it in a sphere pattern typically. So I've put it low. It's not able to, it's wasting a lot of the signal going into the ground, and it's in this little canyon of furniture and wall. So all those things are attenuating the signal. It'd been better to have it up high, but my wife doesn't like cords and cables in view. Down in this corner, she didn't mind it so much. So we didn't have the best signal with that. This is a layout of my house and where we put that wireless access point. It's right here at the center of this point in my wife's office downstairs, and this is roughly a empirical drawing of how far my coverage seemed to be. Upstairs was another 2D circle of smaller diameter above this point, but she could sit in her office and be on the Wi-Fi. I got some network cameras, and I had one located here. We got our Amazon Alexa and put it here in the kitchen on the counter. I had a camera here, and those seemed to work okay with that signal, but I couldn't do too much else. If I wanted to have my Chromebook and sit at the table over here in the nook, it really didn't get a good signal. If I wanted to have a camera over here to look this way, couldn't get signal. If I ever wanted to put a Ring doorbell or something like that in, or I had wired cameras that looked out from this bedroom and I wanted to replace it with a wireless one, but I couldn't get signal because this wireless access point didn't provide the capability. I could have put another one up here or something like that, or put several, but it would have had to be separate networks with separate SSIDs, kind of a pain. Now, a real handy tool, if you've got a wireless network and you want to see what you've got, is a Wi-Fi analyzer. And now they're available just as an app for your phone. I don't know if they have them for iPhones, but this is the one I used that some friends recommended. It's Wi-Fi Analyzer, Android app. You want to look for this one. There's a bunch, and there's probably one for Apple too, but this one is by Farproc. That's the way to find it in the Google Play Store, Wi-Fi Analyzer, and that's the one by Farproc. It's a very useful tool because it puts up a representation of the signal strength, and it will identify your SSIDs. This was the SSID of my wireless access point, Spider Dijon, but you can see, oh, there's other things out here. This is maybe one of my neighbor's signals here. This I found, this is very interesting, that you can use it to diagnose, well, you might find signals you don't really realize you have. I have a couple of HP OfficeJet printers, and they are a wired interface, but they also have wireless capability. But I didn't know it came default turned on because I saw here, oh, it's transmitting a Wi-Fi signal. Even though I don't use it, I need to find, the way to turn it off so that I'm not polluting the Wi-Fi airwaves unnecessarily. But that's something you can find out with this. These are near real time. You move around in the house and then stop for a few seconds. The signal will catch up and you'll be able to see what the amplitude is. They're really good for identifying signals. I figured out this was my AT&T uh, TV broadcast between stations, TVs in the house. This, I don't know what it is. It's a neighbor's thing, probably. So you can see network interference that you're having. It has several different screens, which I'll show. You can take snapshots, so you can take references of what your signal's like at one point or another, and it's free. This was the signal representation with my Wi-Fi access point right in front of the router at my wife's, right in front of the access point at my wife's desk, and it had good signal strength in this channel, although this one's kind of sharing the channel a little bit, not so good. Here are the other screens that this app provides. You can do things monitor over time and things like that, but the most useful one is this signal strength one. And so with that wireless access point, I could see, oh, in the nook where I wanted to be sitting at the table with my Chromebook, I didn't have that much signal strength. It dropped quite a bit, and I was probably getting some interference from this guy. In the living room, man, I was really low compared to some of these other nearby signals, and I'd not be able to put a camera there. Up in my office bedroom, I could never reach anything because the signal was pretty darn low. And in the master bedroom, where my wife would like to lay in bed in the morning and surf the web on her iPhone, nope, there's too many signals that have about the same kind of strength, and this is pretty low to start with. So I could empirically show what my situation was. So I had to find something to make my wife happy and provide better capability. And something that's come out in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, I guess, is mesh routers, mesh Wi-Fi capability. What is mesh? It's a modular whole house Wi-Fi setup with a single SSID. It consists of a couple different components. Typically, you really need two, a router and then at least one satellite, because it then provides two different RF sources, and they are linked together and coordinating with each other to provide wider geographic capability. Now these are available as consumer products. If you see advertisements for cable companies and things like that, they're advertised like as whole house Wi-Fi or panoramic Wi-Fi. That's the same kind of setup that they offer, as a service for some cost. But you can also buy them, put them in yourself, and have a system as well. As I said, these units work together, coordinating what signal is being received by either of the components or one or more components to provide seamless coverage with the same SSID and no dead spots. They're really beneficial for larger homes, ones with a lot of interference, where you've got a lot of signal blocking materials, from one part of the house to another, or you're getting outside interference, even in like a apartment situation where the geographic range is small, but perhaps you're getting interference signals from either side of you, and you want to have a signal in the back part of your apartment that it doesn't really reach to. Even if you put something in the middle to try and cover both ends, you could have two of these units to spread the signal out and be able to have reception there. So mesh features are, the router has wired connections to your home network. The satellites, which you can have one or more, connect typically wirelessly to that router. There are some that have a wired capability, probably thinking, oh, they won't use up the wireless bandwidth connecting and talking between the routers. They want to use that strictly for outside devices. But there's so much bandwidth in these new Wi-Fi standards that most of them now just connect wirelessly between the router and the satellites. And that has the benefit of you not having to have a wired connection at all of the devices that you want to have in the locations you want. all you need is power for satellites typically. For modular, you can add satellites typically, although you'll probably buy it as a single item with 2 or more devices. But in theory, you could, if you decided you wanted more capability, you weren't getting coverage as far on your property as you wanted, you could buy another satellite and add that. As I said, it's seamless roaming. It's as if you had a super router spread throughout your house rather than having multiple things. And the routers usually provide all the typical features you're used to in most modern routers. Now, where can you get these? There are a number of companies that are making them now more and more all the time. All the typical suspects in the networking field: Linksys, Netgear, Asus. Google was one of the first ones, came out with their Google Wi-Fi, and one of our user group officers got that early on, and that was one of the things, seeing his presentation he gave to us on Google Wi-Fi and how his worked, made me think this is really maybe the answer to my problem with Wi-Fi. But all these companies sell them, and there's more coming out all the time. Now, routers in general have gotten more expensive, but mesh routers are another tier up because they are so complicated and they have multiple devices. They're effectively a little computer in a box, even more so than a router, that's coordinating all these signals between the satellites. So they can be, I don't know what the $66 one, which I did find, there's one that's $66. What its capability is, probably not much, but for a good one, most of them are typically in the $200 to $400 or $500 range. But I've found, I bought mine a couple years ago, and it was well worth it to solve all of my network problems. After looking at different ones, I decided to get a Netgear Orbi, and it's a 3-unit mesh router with 1 router and 2 satellites. It utilizes, they call tri-band RF communications between the units. It's really a single 2.4 gigahertz channel plus 2 5 gigahertz channels, and there are 23 of those 5 gigahertz channels, so there's still plenty more for external communication. It uses those 3 channels to communicate between the router and the 2 satellite units. It's got much better antennas in it. It's got a quad-core processor in it, so that's part of the issue with how expensive they are. They're pretty complicated devices. It does provide wired Ethernet ports, so that if you needed to have a wired connection for some reason at the far end where you had a satellite device, you can plug into it, and that will effectively bridge that area with a wired network. If you had wired at one end of your house and you needed wired at the other end, you can use that as a bridge rather than having to run a wire, Ethernet cable. They're very easy to set up. Mine work, very easily right out of the box. Very simple setup, but they do have lots of features in them, so that if you want to, you can, really set everything. But they have, basic setups that are easy to do, and they even work with the Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant products. Although if you're not doing a lot of things, I think you can turn the guest accounts on and off through that, and a few other things. I've not tried that. I figured I've got enough other things to do with them than rather than playing with my router through it. But you do have that capability. It's something they can advertise. This is a picture off the box of the product showing how it typically works. With mine, it said to put the router in the center of your house and your satellites at different ends, so that you could get then coverage. Normally, if you just had a router in the center of your house, you might have a circle of coverage that went something like that. But with these 2 satellites, it extends it out to the entire area that's shown. Now, this is what my products documentation said. Later, in looking on the Netgear website, they said that they can also be daisy chained, so that if it was more convenient and you had your network connection here and it wasn't convenient to have a network connection here, you could have your router here and then a satellite here and a satellite here, and they would daisy chain the RF connections, and that would work as well. Probably a firmware upgrade from what I had with my setup, but I've set mine up in the same way that they talked about. So why did I want to do this at all? Well, I had, as I said, problems with getting coverage for my smart devices. That really, those darn smart devices are really driving what we want to have for Wi-Fi. The more you have, the more you want, and the more you want, the more you've got to provide better Wi-Fi. All those cameras and light controllers and smart bulbs. I really wanted to have front yard coverage for some security cameras and wanted to be able to sit on the back patio and web surf. I looked at some of the reviews and found that Orbi had good reviews. I could have probably gone with a smaller system, maybe only 2-unit satellite and a router, but Costco had this at a good price, and I decided this would be it. But it's really probably overkill for my house. Now, this is what the Orbi devices look like. They look reasonable, little kind of like smart speakers. They're attractive enough. They have a little light ring up at the top. They all look the same. One of these is the satellite, or one of these is the router, and the other two are satellites. But from looking at them, you really don't see that. You have to look at the back. On the router, there is a WAN internet connection where your internet from your home network would come, and then 3 Ethernet network output ports, because this is a real router. You can set this up for network address translation, and this can be a real router with this coming from your modem from DSL or cable, and then this being your wired network connections, and your Wi-Fi is also that way. Now, because my service provider provides a combined modem router product, and I can't get to the modem separately, I've ganged them, and my actual wired network is a different network than this. I could have set this up also as an access point, but I didn't see any need to. I'm running this as a router as well, so I effectively have this router out of a network port on my other router, and it works fine. But this would be the same network as your Wi-Fi is. It also has a USB port, which I found no information about. Must be some kind of development thing. And DC, and of course the paperclip reset button. On the satellite units, you have 4 Ethernet outputs, and these would be if you wanted to have, like I said, remote wired Wi-Fi or wired Ethernet and power. So the satellite only needs power, so it's much more easy to locate it in your house because of that. You don't have to worry about having a wired connection available. The only place you have to have that is with the router. So in adding this to my home network, I had to figure out how to set this up. And where I put the router, where this red dot is, the same spot I had my access point. But because of the more powerful RF capabilities of this, I've determined that its range just by itself is a lot bigger, and I can get a lot more of the places I was looking for just with that one device alone. And wider space in the upper story as well. But I still didn't have capability over here in the corner with a camera here, or if I wanted to have cameras in the front. So my second unit was satellite, was put where this green dot is, and you'll see why I color-coded these in a minute. The green dot here is a satellite, and it covers all of my back, and a more redundant coverage for the entryway, so I could have that Ring doorbell if I wanted to. And then the second satellite I put in this upstairs bedroom right here, so that I could get a lot of coverage in the front and get the garage as well. So this is what they looked like in their new locations. They didn't look too objectionable to my wife. So here is the router here on the left side here. It looks like it could sit on a piece of furniture and not be too ugly. So as I said, the router needs network and power, whereas the satellites only need power. So it's easy to find a place. All they have to do is find a place where there's an outlet and plug them in. To set up the mesh network, you turn the power on the router and have its internet connection plugged into it. And then that light ring kind of has a pattern. It circles around, and then when it goes to solid white, that means that router has booted up effectively. Then you take your first satellite and figure out where you're going to put it, plug it in, and turn it on. And the light ring will turn white and kind of modulate. And then finally it will, once it's made its connection, it will light to a color to indicate its status. And then you do the same thing for the second satellite. Now those satellites, when you turn them on, they will boot up, and then for about 3 minutes after they finally boot up, it will indicate a color, and that way you can determine if you've got a good connection. If they turn blue, then the connection between the satellite and the router is good. If it's amber, then it's fair, and you might want to consider relocating it. If it's magenta, you definitely have a problem and you're too far away, or you've got some big piece of metal in between, and you need to figure out how you relocate that to get a better signal for that satellite. And setup is very easy. You can set the router up once you've got those satellites plugged in and they're indicating a good signal. You can either connect to any of these Orbi units with an Ethernet cable for your use with your laptop or desktop, and the packaging has a default IP address that it will tell you to use, or you can do it through Wi-Fi with your smartphone, tablet, Chromebook, or laptop, or whatever. And there's a preset factory SSID and password that you would use. And then you can, using either of those two, use either the Netgear Orbi app, which you'd use on your smartphone or tablet. Load that from the Google Store or Apple Store and follow the instructions, or web browser, which is what I did with my Chromebook. You just go to put orbilogin.com in your browser, and it will come up with a place to put in your default username and password, and then it will lead you through the setup. When you do this, you want to change your SSID and password and make sure your security is as robust as a setting. You have many settings in there, but you want to go in and set it to the most robust security setting as you can. So one of the issues with this is you're transmitting a lot more power, a lot more vulnerability in terms of who could actually see your signal. With my wireless access point, my signal could barely get out of my house at all, so I was probably not at too big a risk in reality. But now I'm broadcasting Wi-Fi out into the backyard, beside my house, into the front. My neighbors were probably not real happy that I got this unit if they are now finding more interference. Could be a Wi-Fi war. But because of that, you really want to make sure your Wi-Fi security is the maximum you can set it. You'll also want to register your product and get any firmware updates. There's all the different optional settings that typically routers have: guest accounts, parental control, MAC address filtering. This has it too. Now, what did it get? What did this get me? Here is the signal right in front of the router. Whereas before with the access point, it was only about this kind of amplitude. Now you can see it's a lot higher. And note that this is the SSID I'm using, Black Lake. Notice there's two other signals. This one's the red one, as it corresponds to that red dot. The green and the yellow correspond to those satellites. They're present and you can see them, but it doesn't require your device to do anything. It's using the same SSID, and they coordinate the signal so that you can move throughout the house between the satellites and the router, and your device doesn't have to do anything. But you can see I've got a lot of signal here in the living room where I had problems. I'm now predominantly seeing the satellite's signal, and that's very strong. So now I can put devices in that corner of the living room. Right in front of the other satellite, I have a lot of signal. In the nook where I wanted to use my Chromebook, I've got plenty of signal now compared to anything else. On the patio in the back, I've still got lots of signal. In the family room, far corner of the house, I've got lots of signal. The dining room at the other opposite, or the other side of the back of the house, plenty of signal, though you can see that it's now dominated by that green signal that the one satellite is providing. Living room, same thing. Even outside in front of the house from that satellite that's up in the upper bedroom, I'm getting a lot of signal, and it's dominating anything else that is from the neighbors, and I can still get good coverage there. Up in the master bath in the far corner of the house, I've got good signal. In the master bedroom where my wife wants to lay in bed and use the iPhone on Wi-Fi, she's got lots of signal. And up in the bedroom that's my office in front, I've got lots of signal, as well as the bedroom next to it where the Wi-Fi is. So in summary, now all my devices are happy, and the one that matters the most, my wife, is happy. They're all getting good Wi-Fi coverage, and I've had no problems with it. It's been very solid and robust. And that is the end of my presentation. We'll go back to David and see if there are any questions.
Yep, as I said, let's see how we run here. Because I got a couple questions. It's real easy. And a gentleman wants to know if you could buy a Wi-Fi analyzer as a standalone tool. I'm not sure exactly he understands what you're using.
You certainly can, I think. They're pretty expensive, but this is a really good tool if you have a smartphone that you can download, an Android smartphone. I suspect they have them for Apple too. I don't do it, and my wife's not interested in that. But certainly for Android, I know they have several apps. You will turn your phone into a Wi-Fi analyzer. But yes, I'm sure there are commercially available Wi-Fi analyzers. Probably have more features, faster response, but I found this is great for free.
Then we have a question: can you mix and match different manufacturers? I guess like for additional satellites or stuff.
I would suspect no. They are going to use proprietary means where they can. The IEEE standards allow your phones and the Wi-Fi from all these different brands to be able to interact, but the satellite to router transmissions are probably a proprietary thing, and I would guess no, they won't allow you to do that. I'm sure someone else's satellite setup is probably different for, say, Linksys than Netgear, and you couldn't, you wouldn't be able to, it may not have the light ring, it may not be able to do that. So I would say no, that's not something you could ever expect, I would guess.
Okay, I'm gonna have a question I do not know if you can answer in a short period of time. If not, we can get back to Ron on this. He says, I have a new TCL TV that connects through a built-in Roku. Okay, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
In the morning, I have to connect the TV to the network. The connection drops overnight. Do you think this is an Orbi setting? He says he has the 2-device Orbi.
He has an Orbi and he's having that issue with it?
Yeah.
My experience is I've not seen any of my devices have connection problems over time. It may be something to do with his TV. Has he seen any other problems with any other devices on his Orbi Wi-Fi? At this point, he needs to go into a trouble. He has not. So he needs to go into a troubleshooting mode, probably with the TV. It may be something to do with, how long the TV can stay on a network connection. I don't know.
Okay. One quick question. He says, when we set up, we'll have 2 access points, one from the primary provider and the other from the mesh network. You only got 1 access point in the whole house, right?
Well, my system has a router and then 2 satellites. It is one unified mesh network. So the satellites, I guess, could be thought of as access points, but they're on the same network as opposed to a regular access point, which is its own Wi-Fi network and would have its own SSID. That's the benefit of the mesh networking. Those devices coordinate between each other. It's like a separate router, wireless router, and wireless access point that have this back channel of communication that can make it look like they're one RF system.